have an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Ilias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J. Co-hosting with me live in London, of course, is Johnny Webb, where it happens to be 3 a.m. As usual, we have an awesome show for you today, but today is extra special because we have someone who's always on top of UFO news, someone who literally you can have on a week apart, and literally the show would end with never having enough time. And, of course, so much new information. And that happens to be, of course, the one and only Linda Moulton Howe. Ms. Howe, welcome to the show.
Dr. J, thanks for having me on, and thank you for that introduction. Well, there is so much happening, both in Earth mysteries and the environment and the solar system around our planet now, that I think it could take 20 of us working 24 hours around the clock to keep up with what's happening now.
You're absolutely right. And let me spit out these three pieces of UFO news, and then we got to go into something really important. And if you want to comment on these, by all means, because these all relate to important stuff, things that you've been working on. This does not surprise me, first of all, this first one. NASA, where is it? Here we go. UFO orbs captured on NASA's space station video. And, of course, go figure, NASA shuts it off. How often do you see this happening? I've seen it at least every other month, at minimum 3 months.
And one of the interesting things is that when there is somebody on the web at YouTube who posts a video because they are devoting their life to watching the ISS feed and getting a clip of something and putting it up, what is often the first attack that it is a CGI photo ploy and that it's not real. And that we now are in a very bizarre world digitally where those of us who are simply trying to learn facts and report them because we have governments that are not reporting anything to us, that because it is the digital age, we now have to do reality checks on every single thing that makes it to YouTube because of this attack.
You're absolutely right. One thing that scares me is before it was just attack the story, attack the person, but now it's like, nope, CGI. That's the first thing. You're absolutely right. This other story, I know you didn't. I know this doesn't surprise you because you are always on top of the news and you receive a lot of reports. UFO spotters shocked as the number of UFOs, alien craft sightings has doubled in the last month of June 2015. This comes out of the Mirror in the UK. You're not surprised by that, are you? I'm not. Something's got to be happening, and I've just been blown away paying attention to the news. Literally, when we give the news report, UFO news at the beginning of the show, at how many there are to choose from lately.
Well, and the phenomena has had cycles ever since it really burst on the scene in World War II with the Foo Fighters. And why is that? Why is it that there are months in which I could say I'm expecting an animal mutilation report, a half-cat report, human abductions to spike, or that people are seeing more and more strange things in the sky? And it is a cyclic nature that has always been puzzling, but people have noted it for decades. And in England, I think England was reporting about a big flare-up of UFOs just about 2 years ago. And so they keep more, perhaps they're keeping more track on the records of sightings because it is an island nation, and we are about 3,000 miles long, and from Canada to Mexico, there aren't many news operations that are reporting about UFO news. More so, I think, in the UK.
Exactly, and is this a repeat of the golden era following World War II after we set off the nuclear weapons and the flurry of UFOs started coming in? I mean, that's what I'm at least gathering from this.
Well, I personally think going all the way back to 79 when I started investigating the animal mutilation mystery around the world, up to right now we're speaking on July 7th, 2015, and in those 36 years, I would say that there have been these cyclic periods where everyone was saying it's going to break. We're going to, the non-humans themselves, they're going to fill the skies and they're going to crack this open, whether the governments do anything or not. And those sorts of sensations have come, I think now, with a perspective of 36 years, that there is something that is more intense now than I have felt in a long time. But I don't put it in the category right now, of the sky filling or this year the UFO landing on the White House lawn syndrome. I don't think it's going to happen right now, but maybe in another year that we are finally going to get that 3-inch headline that we are not alone in this universe. There will be a confirmation of other life. I don't care if it's microbes on Mars or something swimming in Europa. We're going to have that break. And once that happens, Dr. J, that's all we need is that 3-inch headline around the world and in every iPhone and computer. And from that moment forward, the world will never be the same again, because everyone will have permission to tell what's actually happening to them, because we can't live in a world where everybody is criticized and CGI rocks are thrown at them because they are trying to report something that has been so firmly denied by governments. That's why I feel that we are going to have some kind of a breakthrough on that headline, "We're not alone in the universe."
Exactly, and you're absolutely right. Part of me thinks that this might actually be the time. I remember when I started paying attention in the 80s, I always thought the 40th anniversary would be it. Then after that simulcast of Soviet Union and America with those two guys, Falcon and Condor, I thought that was going to be it. Then, of course, the Roswell report came out. And there's just been all these times when I thought this was it. But really, I'm more hopeful about now than ever. And part of this goes back to what we talked about a couple months ago, which leads into the next topic. When you came on and you talked about John Burroughs and Penniston, where the UK finally, through their I believe it was the Condon report, finally recognized that something happened, a UFO landing that affected these two gentlemen, was the first time we had de facto disclosure. And I think that really set the ball rolling and set the tone for the rest of the world. And I know you have some amazing new info on this.
Well, yes, and what you're referring to, that Condon report, as it was discussed in the MOD by two groups and factions that do investigations in the MOD related to what they call unidentified aerial phenomena, DI-55 and DI-52. And both of those agencies were involved in investigations of non-ionizing radiation that is defined in a 460-some page report that no one knew anything about, literally, until 2010 to 11. John Burroughs and Penniston and I went with the Ancient Aliens production television crew to England for the December 2010 35th anniversary, or 30th anniversary of the December 26 to 28, 1980 phenomena that took place at what was then NATO's largest air base in Europe. And what no one was supposed to know at the time is that there were nuclear tactical instruments in both sides, the Bentwaters and on the Woodbridge side. So it was a sensitive base, and the very fact that over 72 hours, starting around midnight, December 26th, to after midnight, to when the sun was coming up on December 28th, many people were exposed to something extraordinary, high strangeness in the Rendlesham Forest. And on the first night, it was John Burroughs, who was an airman. He was with Jim Penniston, who was a staff sergeant and was seasoned in investigating airplane crashes, and another young airman named Ed Kavansak. And Ed Kavansak was assigned to stay with their truck when they got to a point in the road that was too bumpy and frozen in the December cold winter night for them to proceed with the truck. And so Burroughs and Peniston got out, and when we were in England shooting for Ancient Aliens, they demonstrated how they started trying to run through the thick, tall forest, many trees, 2 and 3 feet only, all of the trunks so close together. And they were showing how they were trying to run after Christmas tree colored lights, red, blue, yellow, orange, and that as they ran, the lights seemed to be close and then far away and close and then far away, and that how they fell. And the falling was because all of that land in that forest, in that area where they were showing us, goes in rolling hills, very up and down burns, as the English would call it. So it was to them shocking that the lights could move so quickly, and they were trying, but as humans, they could not go through the forest and keep up with the lights. And all of this comes to a moment that summarizes the mystery of so many people who experienced all kinds of strange interactions in those 72 hours, and that is that Peniston remembers getting to a point in the forest as they were running where there is a gigantic flash of light, white light, and in his mind, he associates the sudden appearance of a black, glassy, triangular craft approximately 7 to 9 feet long, seemingly suspended above the ground by what he thought was light. And at the same time that Peniston remembers that, John Burroughs remembered running after the lights, and he doesn't remember a thing about the black glassy triangle, not much about the bright light. And Peniston is becomes aware, says that he had no idea where John was, but that he walked around this black glassy craft, dragging his fingers along the surface, realizing that it was warmer than the very cold winter humid air, and that when he got up to the front vertex of the triangular craft, that there were raised symbols. He could feel them with his fingers. He compared it to touching Braille. And as soon as his fingers touched those raised symbols at the front of this black glassy object that had lights moving underneath the skin of it, so to speak, his mind was filled with zeros and ones and telepathic information that tied the craft, the blast of light, and what he was experiencing to time travelers that he estimated came from 40,000 years in the future on a desperate effort to keep surviving because the civilization had run into some kind of a problem, and they were coming back to this, what would have then been the 20th century, in order to gather genetic material to use, quote-unquote, as Band-Aids to keep, is it us? Is it something else in a future alive? Now, that is Jim Peniston's experience. John Burroughs was right next to him in the forest. They were right together running. John doesn't have any experience like that, but he does remember blue lights, amid orange and white lights, but the blue lights, they have haunted him since that night. And when we have done half a dozen or a dozen hypnosis sessions, trying to break through the blocks in John Burroughs' mind about what happened, he can't get there. And every time it is the blue lights. He talks about how the blue lights come into his mind under hypnosis and block him from going forward, block him from seeing, block him from remembering. And now I've laid the stage very specifically for now explaining to the audience what Project Condign in all of its 460-some pages is about. It even references in an Appendix F, as in Frank, on page F4, after spending all kinds of graphs and scientific reports about unidentified aerial phenomena radiation that the MODs DI-55 and 52 had been studying. It's a very scientific paper. It was not designed for the public. It's very difficult to read. It does have many graphics and many summaries about the impact that non-ionizing, now non-ionizing gets you up to ultraviolet X-rays and gamma rays. Those are ionizing. They tear apart cell structures. Those are heavy-duty radiation from bombs or gamma rays from the cosmic universe. When you come down below UV, you come into the areas of what are called non-ionizing radiation, and there is a very specific area between microwave and infrared that is called terahertz. And interestingly enough, those frequencies are also what are used in the scanners in airports and were very controversial when those scanners started being introduced into airports, because there were some points of view in the scientific community that humans should not be exposed to terahertz frequencies, even though it's non-ionizing. But the airports and the Homeland Security and the government and everybody assured everyone that exposure would be so short that it would not cause damage. Now, where does this damage issue come in? In the Condign report, which is technically a number report about unidentified aerial phenomena, the UK has started for some time now using the acronym UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, changing from the American UFO from the 1947 period when it started. But they are essentially the same thing. They are craft, unidentified craft, and unidentified beings, I'm going to say intelligences, associated with this unidentified aerial phenomena, and that the report confirms over and over again, and even puts it in the context of what happened in Rendlesham Forest, that this unidentified aerial phenomena, specific frequency of non-ionizing radiation, can manipulate human minds to see something that is not there, and can damage human tissue, including the heart and the eyes. And this is the first report that any of us know that, for reasons unknown, another mystery, it was classified UK eyes only, very highly classified in the UK MOD. And in 2006, and no one has ever explained why or how, it was quietly under the radar, declassified, but none of us knew anything about it until after we got back from that England trip. So that was, I think, the earliest we heard anything about this was 2011, 2012. And it really became relevant to John Burroughs because we got back on New Year's Day of 2012 from the Ancient Alien shoot. And within 3 to 4 weeks after return, John Burroughs became very ill. And that was his first round with doctors in Phoenix, where he lived at the time, and they were completely baffled about why were his lungs taking in liquid, and he was having heart fibrillations, and he was really, really in serious trouble. And doctors got him sort of, I'm going to say, restored from the first cycle of attack, but it didn't end. And through 2012 into 2013, John Burroughs was going downhill. And the interesting part about this, keeping the Project Condign unidentified aerial phenomena, non-ionizing radiation in your mind that can damage human hearts and eyes and manipulate human minds. That the civilian doctors could not understand how a guy, he's 55 this month, so this is going back about when he was a little after 50, 51, 52. They couldn't understand how a man who was essentially was strong, was in relatively good health, did not have any signs of any what would be called congenital heart disease, and yet his heart was the organ that was so affected in these cycles of attacks that he was having. And they were running all kinds of tests, doing all kinds of things, and finally, there's a lot of backstory that I can't go into for complex reasons, but eventually, a doctor who has admitted publicly that he has done work for 50 years for the Central Intelligence Agency related to UFOs, came forward with some information about the leaflets in the heart, in the mitral valve. And once the civilian doctors had this other information, they were able to set surgery. John went into surgery on December 18th, 2013, and survived. And he is grateful that somebody behind the scenes, behind the matrix, where they have this information that we have been studying in the UK document, that there is danger in the close-up presence to unidentified aerial phenomena, and John Burroughs and Jim Penniston were exposed on December 26th. Other people were in the forest on December 27th. December 28th, same kind of thing, only that's the famous night when Colonel Halt had a tape recorder and was going with, it was more than a dozen men, and they had light-alls to light the forest, they had Geiger counters, they had night scopes, they were going to try to once and for all, what is this that keeps interacting with Rendlesham Forest? So all these people were out there, and John Burroughs, this part mystifies him. He felt urgence that he had to get into the forest that night, and all sorts of things happened to get him to the forest. And when he got there, and he said, please tell Colonel Halt I'm here, I feel like I need to be here. And Colonel Halt said, all right, John, you can go up toward the lights with Adrian Bustinza, a sergeant that was there, and another mystery, why did Halt do this? And so John Burroughs starts moving toward the lights in this strange urgency that he felt overwhelming need to get close to the lights again. And Adrian Bustinza, walking beside him, has told John and me in the past to our face that he suddenly felt like he was pushed to the ground by the light. That's a direct quote. I was pushed to the ground by the light. And what he was seeing, Bustinza, was that John was moving forward and that red, orange lights in some kind of a configuration, and this was Bustinza's word, engulfed, covered, came over John. So that places John Burroughs as the only person who twice had a close-up encounter. And on that first night, December 26th, one of the rumors on the base, the way things go between Central Security Control and people who are working the base security, they hear a lot of things. And one of the rumors was that a man in the forest that later was identified as John Burroughs jumped up on a flying saucer in the forest. And that has been out there since the World News released the first Rendlesham Bantwaters mystery story back in 1983. So that means that for 3 years, authorities had their way. Nobody knew anything about what had happened in the forest. And today, John has been through the heart surgery that appears to be directly linked to the exposure to the unidentified aerial phenomena radiation, and that is the phrase used over and over again in this MOD report, and that he knows he can't break through something in his mind because every time he tries, these blue lights impact him in his mind's eye, so to speak. And it raises the question again, what is it that government authorities who have been riding this difficult horse of unidentified flying objects and non-humans alive and dead since at least World War II, what do they know specifically about the blue lights, about the, we'll call it the UAP non-ionizing radiation, and they know enough to be able to help somebody like John Burroughs when he was close to heart failure and getting him through surgery because they knew what part of the heart would most likely have been damaged, the leaflets. And when you read this report, I struggle with it. Everybody does. It's very difficult. But you come out the other side and you realize, as John Burroughs' attorney, Pat Frasconia, said in the press release in February, this is a de facto confirmation in a once upon a time Eyes Only UK report that in its title is about unidentified aerial phenomena and the kind of radiations they release and what those radiations can do at different distances from craft, and the part that is so relevant to John, that the non-ionizing UAP radiation can manipulate human brains / minds, and part of the manipulation can be to provoke images in the human mind that are not there in matter reality.
I think that's actually one of the two most important things. And then Johnny's got a question. I'm going to make a quick comment on that. First of all, the fact that the UK used UAP to get away from the stigma of UFO just shows that they took it seriously. The non-ionizing radiation affecting the mind and causing people to see things that aren't there, I think is phenomenal to actually have that on record from a government official, because this can finally explain the screen memories. I'm going to give it to Johnny in the UK. Johnny, you with us?
That's a very good point, and just one close footnote. The MOD, on purpose, may have changed to UAP because what have they been doing over the last 10 years? Trying to convince the world public that they were taking all of their UFO desk files and transferring them to the National Archive, right? And they've done this with a lot of public show. And yet, because John Burroughs, after he survived surgery, started filing Freedom of Information Act requests with the MOD. And in September of 2014, less than a year ago, was able to get admission that the MOD has withheld 18 UFO, UAP-related files. And at my news website, Earthfiles.com, on the headlines page, I have a summary of what the MOD sent to John of what it is that they are withholding, and that 6 of these are policy files. Policy files usually have most of the meat in them, and one of the most amazing things took place on July 1st, and that was in Parliament in London, where the Big Ben clock is. Lord Black of Brentwood said to an MOD representative, quote, in relation to the 18 MOD files on unidentified aerial phenomena that have yet to be released to the public, what is the originating division of the file reference, capital M, the number 9/18 ? We'll talk about that in just a second. What is the remit, meaning the remittance of that division in relation to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena? And what is the Ministry of Defense's latest estimate of when the 18 files will be passed to the National Archives and then released to the public. This is Lord Black in Parliament, July 1, a week ago. The reply from Defense Minister Earl Howe, quote, the originating branch of file reference M09/18 relates to ministers' private offices. It's a little bit like them admitting, like Hillary Clinton having her server as Secretary of State in her house and no one was ever to have anything from it. Ministers' private offices. The latest estimate of when the 18 files will be delivered to the National Archives is before March 2016. That's now less than a year away. The National Archives will make the necessary judgment about when it will release these files to the public, close quote. Well, this is amazing, actually, that a lord in Parliament would become so interested in the UFO, UAP phenomena and the fact that the MOD admitted to John Burroughs it had withheld 18 files that only 4 or 5 years ago had made this big show on the Larry King Hour and all of that they had released all of their UFO files. So they hadn't, and they haven't. And what will they release by March of 2016 is now yet another mystery in all of the R.A.F. Bentwaters saga. We have no guarantee, none, that what they will release will have information in it about John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, what happened to Charles Halt, and all of the people at Rendlesham. They can still keep, we'll say, blacked out. They will go through and they will vet these documents, and they could release, and this is a possibility, they could release 18 or some portion of the 18 with whiteout all the way through every document. And they could do it legally in the interest of national security and still comply with the Parliament's inquiry on the withheld files. That is going to be very interesting to see how much will be revealed in these 18 files, or maybe nothing.
Just like Freedom of Information Act requests, when we get documents that have literally nothing but the date and CIA, and it's all blacked out, redacted. I mean, it bothers the heck out of me when we receive that. Now, this is just pure speculation, but we could only find this out when they do release these 18 files, or at least parts of them. Do you know of any cases that happened in the UK where others were affected that may be in these files? Again, I know this is pure speculation, but can you think of any case off the top of your head from probably since World War II where someone was affected the same way Burroughs was? Well,
I really respect what you are asking. It is an excellent question, and I don't know, and the reason is parameters. The DI-55 and DI-52 investigation that is detailed in this 460-plus page report has a section with graphs, and it relates to the amount of exposure to the non-ionizing radiation in terms of distance. So there's an intensity of radiation and a distance quotient. And depending upon, I believe, in fact, it says in the Condign report, and remember, you're not going to see a page called Condign report. That was the phrase used inside of the MOD about this project by DI-55 and 52 in the MOD that is entitled Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. So just make that point.
Linda, it's John in London, and just to clarify something, are we talking about in the same sort of sense as soil samples found in crop circles that have, say, heat effect by microwaves and in some case radiation? Are we talking about in Rendlesham, when John Burroughs was there, his illness has been caused by what is believed touching the craft and getting some sort of radiation.
No,
And because I've also heard that in
wait,
Rendlesham Forest, Linda,
yeah, no,
there's
wait.
also reports of radiation on the beach.
We've gotten things mixed up here. Microwave radiation, that's radar. Microwave radiation is what Levengood and some people in England are convinced is some of the energy in spinning plasma vortices in the crop formations, but that's different, completely different from a terahertz frequency. You can look at it on an electromagnetic frequency chart. And when you get into the terahertz frequency range, and that is not, we're not even sure what the frequency is, but that is the area where whatever is emitted from the craft can do this damage and manipulate minds. And what I was going to point out is that one of the graphs has a distance in meters from where you would be free of harm from this UAP radiation. And if I'm recalling the graph correctly, it is about 300 feet. And so at least from a football field, and it might have been 100 meters, but it's somewhere in there that the fall off is not considered to be harmful. But if you're closer from there to a craft, you can be harmed or have this mental manipulation. So microwave is one frequency, and the electromagnetic frequency chart is something that is so big. I have one on my wall, and it's about 5 by 4 feet, and it is in a big fan. And when you look at from infrared and microwave and so forth up to ionizing radiation, you begin to understand how complex the issue of radiation frequencies are and what they can do in different intensities and distances. And that is what we have been introduced for the first time in this UAP report from the MOD.
There's actually a listener question, and this goes back to what we were talking about, non-ionizing radiation. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you word from word. This is from Wise Frog. Could it be that the radiation is not what is making someone see things that there are not there, but a mental projection from ETs? I hope that's worded correctly. I'm going to repeat it again. Could it be that the radiation is not what is making someone see things, but that there are not there a mental projection from ETs? He didn't word it correctly, but I hope you got the gist of it.
Well, when you read, and what I ought to do right now is go to the report and just read those. But while I'm looking to give you the exact words out of the Condign report, it's my understanding that the impact on the brain and the mind and how it works is a mystery. But that, it says right in the report that images can be created in the human mind of something that is not really there in the matter world. And when you said like screen memories in the decades-long human abduction syndrome, that's one of the first things I thought about too.
I think it's really important that, first of all, that we have a government figure, a government body that actually wrote this in a report. Obviously, they used scientists. As you know, any government investigation takes things seriously. And more importantly, what sort of bothers me is the fact that it doesn't just create things that you could see in your mind that really aren't there, but affects human tissue. This is seriously damaging people.
Okay, and now I am at page F4, Annex F, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in the UK Air Defence Region. And this is out of the executive summary, and it was originally presented to the MOD in December of 2000, very quietly, completely under the radar, declassified for reasons unknown in 2006. And on this page, the title, Potential mental effects on humans. Neurological, rather than biological effects, may be the clue to some human behavior after exposure in the near field of UAP radiation. Particularly sensitive are the temporal lobe areas of the brain. And I'm going to jump down to the well-reported Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods. There may be other cases which remain unreported, which goes to the heart of your question, Dr. J. It is clear that the recipients of these effects are not aware that their behavior and perception of what they are observing is being modified. Then it goes into field strengths and numbers and voltages, and then let's go now to another paragraph 15. It is concluded, therefore, that if some UAPs, as is believed and correlated by actual reports, and here they give examples such as when there's failure of car electrical equipment, which we've all heard about happening since the 50s at least, in the presence of some kind of disk or UFO, that they produce EM radiation, that meaning these craft, that there is a high probability that they can affect, the radiation can affect the human brain. It would seem that this effect can occur when close to a UAP, either outdoors or indoors. This causes the brain to interact in an unusual way with the imagination, and they put library in quotes, imagination library, causing reports of visual activity which are not in fact a true representation of the facts. It is of particular interest that a perusal of a limited number of old UAP reports in the 1900s, while often 1800s, because they do a parent here pre-20th century, so in the 1800s, while often similar to even identical to modern reports, they do not produce evidence of spacecraft aliens, gray or green aliens, portholes, or searchlight beams. And those lists are part of this incredible UAP paper, where they break down and summarize on some pages the cylinders, the triangles, the spheres that have all been reported as UAP.
I just want to warn you, we got a little about 10 minutes before we hit our first break. There's another topic I'm going to wait a few minutes to get into because it's super important. But I think this is the fact that the non-ionizing radiation can affect your mind, cause you to see things that aren't there, is absolutely huge, because as we said, it could explain the screen members. Do you think it's possible that this is also the same reason that certain people are shut off from seeing certain things, such as Burroughs not remembering Peniston going up to the craft?
You know, it is an excellent question because it relates not only what happened in Rendlesham Forest with Peniston and Burroughs being next to each other running after the lights, but how many cases have we heard where somebody said, I pulled my car over, and here was something that had to be the size of a football field, and it's only 100 feet above my car, and I get out, and I'm staring, and it has all of these lights going around the center, and where are the other cars? Or, I saw this thing, and I was driving on the freeway, and I stopped and pulled over my car, but nobody else pulled over their car. Either way, one, a road where one person finds themselves under this stunning thing and nobody else is coming, or there's hundreds of cars streaming on a freeway and one person pulls their car over and nobody else stops or even seems to be aware. That seems to me to be saying that there is something, shall I put it this way, brain-specific, mind-specific, or the ability to interact with the environment in such a narrow, focused way that people seem to be selected for the experiences that they have.
I truly hope the government isn't looking at this just for that reason, so they can end up figuring out how they can use non-ionizing radiation, so they can sort of control us or control our minds by making us see things that aren't there or preventing us from seeing what's happening and what's going on. That would be a really scary thought, because we're known to weaponize everything.
And that is exactly what John Burroughs is afraid of. You've just summarized his own fear.
I honestly don't blame him, and he has every reason to be scared for what he's gone through. Poor guy, 3 decades plus of 3.5 now, 35 years of what he's been going through. And just now he's finally getting answers. Thankfully, he is. I don't want to change topic, but I think it's super important to talk about something. Years ago, you broke out an amazing story about bees just dropping dead. If bees literally disappeared, we would lose our food supply up to 67%, if not more, because of course we need them to pollinate everything. Well, recently, I know you were just talking about new environmental changes with other life dying. I know this is probably going to carry over to the break and after, but I figure we might as well pick it up because it's a huge, huge topic.
Well, it's extremely important, and it is really breaking news on Tuesday, July 7th. And it has taken this long because I think that scientists and people who lived in the Seahorse Key area of Florida kept hoping it was not going to be something that would keep going on. But now, by July 7th, here's the headline. And this is the Tampa Bay Times. They've won 10 Pulitzer Prizes for their journalism. Thousands of birds abandon eggs and nests on Florida's Seahorse Key. Vic Doug, who works for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, he's a biologist, said, quote, the Seahorse Key that once was the largest bird colony on the Gulf Coast of Florida is now a dead zone. No birds anywhere. And they have no answers. They have, biologists have gone to test the nests that have been left behind, the eggs that have fallen and broken, and their tests have been negative for viruses, bacteria, for the various things they've been working. They searched for new predators. Could something new have come in that scared all of this gigantic bird colony away? They can't find anything. Finally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist Vic Doig said that recent years they have wondered if there was a reason, a possibility, an impact on that beautiful and very, very luxurious Seahorse Key that birds have used for so long. Would the increase in things like drones and military operations affect them? But they have even ruled that out now. And one of the statements was from here it is from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Any rookery that has persisted for decades as one of the largest colonies is incredibly important, and there has to have been some intense event that would drive all these birds away. And they have photographs, dozens of photographs, showing a completely empty trees, nothing in the trees, nothing in the beach. Literally, hundreds of thousands of birds have disappeared. And the Tampa Bay News interviewed Mike Odell. He runs one of the marinas in Cedar Key that used to take tourists out. He said that in 1 week in May, he had led a group out to view thousands of birds crowding the shores of the key like normal in the spring. And the very next day, within 24 hours, all were gone. He said it was that drastic. It's like we went from one world to another. Now, when you interrupt when we have to go to the break, but what this leads to me is a question that I have been raising in my investigations of the strange sounds around the world. And what would happen if, as some geophysicists think, this is the century, or at least the end of this century, that the magnetic poles of the Earth may change places. If that happens, what they know from studying ash and lake sediments going back to the last time that the poles changed 876,000 years ago, that for quite a long time leading up to the pole changes, which took place very rapidly, and after, the magnetic field of the Earth dropped down to near zero. If that occurred, the bird population and the marine population that are so dependent upon magnetic fields might be the most affected Earth life leading up to a magnetic pole change. And we can talk more about that after the break if you would like.
Yeah, we got a few more minutes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because a lot of people don't understand that or recognize that birds rely on the magnetism of our poles to be guided. And so, of course, if there's any change in the magnetism, of course it's going to affect the birds.
And last year, the first 6 months of 2014, data coming from the 3 swarm satellites. These are satellites that were put up specifically to monitor and measure magnetic field strengths around the planet. And they had a report in July a year ago that showed that in the first 6 months of 2014 was the most rapid decline in the magnetic field over the western hemisphere of Canada and the United States and coming into the Pacific and down to Mexico, that this whole region was a huge decline while there was a buildup, a strengthening in the Indian Ocean. And the images of what the swarm satellites have been measuring about the magnetic field strengthening and weakening on the Earth is very similar to what a geophysicist named Gary Glatzmeyer in California, who was the very first to run a computer simulation trying to see with a bunch of Cray computers feeding in a lot of information about what had been learned about various parameters in the last pole change, ran these computers and suddenly had a pole shift. And people who see those blue and gold images of the north and south poles as they are entangling and beginning to go from north and south pole to looking like a plate of gold and blue spaghetti, that is from his computer simulation that he just kept running, and they kept going through pole changes in that computer simulation. And he ended up being able to show maps of moving maps of what they were measuring in the computer simulations leading up to a pole flip. And it is so interesting that right now the current state of what is happening in the Western Hemisphere weakening and the strength in the Indian Ocean looks similar to what computer simulations have produced. And if we were going to finally, after 876,000 years, the North will end up in the Antarctic, the South will end up in the Arctic. What does happen during that period of time when magnetic fields are near zero for a period of time? We know solar rays energy from the sun will reach the surface of the Earth. We know that there will be an increase in gamma ray radiation from the cosmos that will be able, because the magnetic fields of this planet protect us so well from solar radiation and gamma rays. So what happens? Well, they've already done projections about the increases in skin cancer, for example, that would occur if the magnetic field is at X point and there is this increase in solar radiation and gamma radiation. Aurorae, the aurorae might be all over the planet. So it has happened many, many times in the Earth's history. And if it is likely to happen at the end of this century, then we, right now in 2015, will be living through the rest of our lives and our next generation's lives in a change that no human has ever seen before.
It's interesting because, you know, as a pilot, when I fly into London City Airport, mostly as a passenger, but, you know, I have flown into London City Airport. The runway is runway now today. It's called runway 10, and obviously it runs in the degrees. It's an easterly flow, so it's runway 10. And if I'm facing west, it's runway 27. But a few years ago it used to be runway 9, and so every few years, where the magnetic pole shifts and moves, the runways actually change numbers. And so there is a relevance to what you're talking about, but it happens now. And I wondered, going back to the bees and birds and things going missing, I wondered if that sort of their built-in GPS, in a sense, is getting shifted where, they're actually taking a different route, and, where they would normally land and settle, they're somewhere else. Do you think this is a possibility?
Well, I brought up this huge piece of evidence of the birds disappearing from this large key in Florida, as this is a gigantic mystery and nobody knows what has happened. But in the context of all this work I have been doing on could this be the century, that the poles flip, and realizing that humans do not have any baseline about what happens when the magnetic fields keep going down and down and down, because we haven't experienced it in humanity in the last 30,000 years, and that the most likely Earth life to be the most affected immediately would be birds and marine animals. And there have been all kinds of unusual behavior by dolphins and whales in the last year or two. The fact that all these birds suddenly disappear, I raise it in the question, what if this is the harbinger of things to come, because there is some sort of a magnetic anomaly? It isn't proved yet. But another piece to the comment on the airports. I did an interview about 10 years ago when they had to change numbers and repaint numbers in Florida on an airport because the GPS systems were out and the magnetic field lines had changed. And in the process of talking with a seismologist and a geophysicist who was specializing in what happens with magnetic fields if, in fact, the poles are getting ready to shift, he said that the reason that the North Pole has been wandering so far towards Siberia for the last 50 years and increasing is because they have been able to determine that there is an upsurge of molten iron. That's the more liquid state that would come up out of a volcano in lava, but is like hot, soft rock in the mantle, and that there is a bulge that is a lot of iron coming up in Siberia. They think that that started 50 years ago and that provoked the North Pole to wander. The poles have always wandered, and the poles have wandered towards Siberia. That would be independent of the magnetic fields on the swarm satellites over the Western Hemisphere going down very rapidly over a 6-month period. That is completely different than the wandering pole towards Siberia. But the whole big picture of the Earth now, without question, paper after paper, there are changes going on in the Earth's inner and outer cores. That is the dynamo that creates the magnetic fields of this planet in the first place. And when there are changes in speeds and instability in the the center core is like a hard sphere of a very specific matrix of iron at the atomic level, and it turns in an easterly direction opposite of the outer core, which is more liquid and is turning with the Earth in a westerly direction. So the inner core of the Earth rotates opposite of the rest of the Earth, rotates more rapidly than the rest of the Earth, and that when atomic changes in the crystallized form of iron in that center sphere begins to change negative and positive polarities, it gets to a certain, we'll call it like, this is the tipping point, and it appears, at least theoretically, that that is what causes the north and south poles to change when there is enough atomic change at the inner and outer core. Well, right now, what scientists do know is that the core have been changing. And will this now be the century where all of this comes to a head and the poles do flip? And to me, this is one of the most exciting stories that I know, but you never see it on the 6 o'clock news.
Never. Thankfully, we have this alternative media. When we get back from break, we're going to pick this up because this is a super important topic. Everybody stay tuned. So much more with Linda Moulton Howe in just 3 short minutes.
This is George Tsoukalos, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, and we have been speaking to Linda Moulton Howe, who is always on top of ufology, literally, and anything exciting that, like she said, you do not hear on the 6 o'clock news. This is why we have alternative media. Real quick, before we turn to her for some important information, Jack Osborne. Did you all enjoy him Thursday? I thought he was so cool, so down to earth. And every time we have a celebrity talking about UFOs that is actually knowledgeable, I think it just helps us in general. He's definitely going to be back. He enjoys the subject more than I thought. So I hope you all enjoyed him, and his interview will be up on YouTube by the end of this week, by Thursday's show. What is going up tonight, of course, is Robert Morningstar, as well as an impromptu conversation with David Sarita and a Navy SEAL Lieutenant Wiegand. You guys will enjoy it. It is exclusive on my YouTube channel, Dr. J Radio Live, which you could find at my website, drjradiolive.com. And now we got some super important news from Linda. Of course, everybody be paying attention to Earthfiles.com. That is the place I check first for UFO news. Linda, let's talk about that. And of course, next appearances, and you have something big coming on the 30th.
Well, first of all, Earthfiles is science, environment, and real X-Files. And I have always dedicated my career to investigating hard science first. And the UFO phenomena in the context of hard science and hard environmental news, I think it has the credibility that it should be given. So I'm not a UFO website. I'm a science, environment, and real X-Files website. And I've been doing news since 1999. It's 2015. And if you go to the Earthfiles archive and you just start scrolling from the top 2015, it takes a while to go through the now about 3,000 reports that I have done with, and we were counting the other day, there's about 50 to 60,000 images, documents, illustrations, and maps represented in all of these in-depth reports. And so I end up using Earthfiles now like my own encyclopedia on science, environment, and the real X-Files do have a lot having to do with the unidentified flying or unidentified aerial phenomena and all things related, because I think it is the most important undiscussed policy of denial and lies about subject on our planet. And in that context, RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, what we were talking about in the last hour, John Burroughs came to me about 3 or 4 months ago and said, I would really like to be able to explore all of the different facets that we have evolved through about RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge investigation that goes from everything from frequencies, the electromagnetic field, medicine, tissue, time travel, things, technologies that can move through space and time or dimensions, what was going on at that NATO base that might have attracted something that was traveling in time or hopping dimensions. And so we talked about it, and I said I wanted to keep doing a lot of other work that I do, but that I would love to join him to help support him. in a radio program in which we could explore all of these facets. There are so many it could keep on going for a long time. And on July 30th, we are going to have the premiere radio program called Phenomenon Radio, and it will be in the KGAR network of web stations. And John and will be hosting, and I will be leading each of the programs we do with news updates, and then trying to stay on to help with questions. And I hope that we can keep it going, because there are so many pieces of RAF Bentwaters. It is as if the whole field of these mysteries, all roads lead to RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge.
Absolutely. And thank you for clarifying about Earthfiles, because you're right. I should have not mentioned that it's just a ufology site, because I find every sort of bit of news there that's not in the mainstream news. Things about Snowden.
Well, I cover a lot of stuff that is mainstream, because I'm covering science and medicine and environment. It's the part that you won't find, and I think is equally important, will be about the UAP UFO phenomena, which still, until we get that big breakthrough headline, we're not alone in the universe, what is the knee-jerk reaction? It's the politically correct position for anchors to take in television shows to giggle about UFO stories. That has got to end, because it is an absolutely serious phenomena that has impact on all Earth life, including humanity.
Exactly. And that's why when you mention that you cover what's not on the mainstream news, that's the part that it's important. That's the part that they should be talking about. But fortunately, we have earthfiles.com, and something super important. Everybody needs to be paying attention to this. Linda has an amazing web series, up to 15 episodes right now, Maze of Deception. And this is free. All you have to do is go to YouTube. Linda, you want to talk about the Maze of Deception in some of the most recent episodes?
Well, it's complex, both in its presentation and the subject matter. I'll start out with the subject matter. People have been asking me, especially in the last 6 months to a year, you have investigated every aspect of the phenomena since you did A Strange Harvest back in 1979 and was broadcast in 1980 about animal mutilations. And since that time, over the last 36 years, I have probably investigated just about every subject that you could name, and I have traveled around the world and in many places. And people have been asking me, what do you think is your personal bottom line now about whether what we're dealing with is good or evil? And so many people are painting it in those two terms that I decided that I would go back to one of the most interesting communications that I had with people who did work for agencies of the United States government. After an introduction with Ray Boucher in Lincoln, Nebraska, he's a practicing Christian minister. He has a doctorate in theology, and he has worked in the business world, but he has also done a lot of investigations with very serious, detailed work having to do with the UFO phenomena. And Ray had contacted me back in the early 1990s about two men who had showed him identification having to do with intelligence agencies, and they wanted to talk with him about eschatology. And Ray had been presenting information in his church work about eschatology, which is, in a phrase, the end of the world. And other people would call eschatology apocalyptic in the sense of the New Testament. And he got into a discussion with these government agents who told him that the other intelligences interacting with this planet were neither benign nor neutral, and that they had seen a book by Linda Moulton Howe called Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1, Facts and Eyewitnesses, and they wanted to talk with me because of some of the material that I had in the book. And this led to a series of, back then, in the 92, 93, 94 time period, we only had little floppy disks. You remember any of that? They were only about 3 inches in diameter, and I can't even remember now. They sure couldn't hold very much.
Nothing. 256 megabytes or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were a way to get some information through the mail that could only go through a computer, and that's what they did. And they sent me a series of a couple of fascinating discussions on these floppy disks. And in my Maze of Deception series that I began about 3 months ago, and I'm now up to part 15 was posted recently, and I'm working on what will be 16, 17, and probably 18. And in the unfolding, what I've tried to do is to take some of the most important pieces that have been sort of revelations to me over the last 36 years, raising the same question that people are asking me today. Are we dealing with something evil, or are we dealing with something good? And I have been unfolding it, of which only the first Earthfiles is available to the general public by clicking on that report. After that, it goes into the subscriber section for a very fundamental reason, for the same reason that I put all the animal mutilations and the half-cats and some things into subscription. Because the material is sobering, it's very difficult. It has been difficult for me, but there is something that I feel in the earnest questions that I am now getting at conferences and through emails, that people are now in their own thinking bypassing government policies of denial. And they themselves have had a lot of experiences, and they have the question, what is the intent of what we are dealing with on this planet? Not, is it there? Not, are we alone? No, those are elementary questions now to so many people. The next phase is already there. It's as the attorney Frasconia said in that press release about John getting his medical benefits, that the Condign report is de facto confirmation. The word disclosure is beginning to not have the meaning it once had, because we're already there. Now are people wanting the details to be filled in. Well, in this series, Maze of Deception, I am dealing with some very, very, very difficult material. And in the two that I just posted, I go into an area that was introduced to me in the 1988, and that this material probably set a tone for me, both post doing so much field investigation in animals and moving forward more into crop formations, human abductions. Why has the government had a policy of denial so strictly since World War II? A whole lot of work that I did in the 90s. This 15 and 16 parts are the material that began to set a whole new ground for me in my thinking and my relationship to the whole concept of what are we dealing with really, and are they coming from another solar system, another galaxy, another universe, or even another dimension? And for those listening who may have themselves have a library about the unidentified aerial and flying phenomena over the years, you probably have on a library shelf a book that was written by Jacques Vallée called Dimensions. That was another one of those pegs that resonated with the material that I came into in 1988. in which I have become increasingly convinced that at least some of the intelligence that we are dealing with can pop in and pop out of frequencies. We're back to frequencies again. We were talking about the electromagnetic frequency chart. We were talking about terahertz frequencies and microwave frequencies and infrared, and there's a fan of frequencies. The rate of the frequency is key, and that some of the technology that has been coming and going and interacting with this Earth, I am convinced, can pop in and out of dimensional frequencies the way we get dressed, go down into a car, and drive to work. And that the scope of some intelligence that Michio Kaku in New York University, the quantum physicist, would say that there are civilizations 3s and maybe even 4s out there that not only are they bending space and time, not only can they move point to point, they are harnessing suns for energy. If we are at that level, and they can pop in and out of dimensions, then their terraforming, their interaction, their harvesting of genetic material is going to be for projects incomprehensible to the human mind. But it would mean that as you get into 15 and 16 parts in my Maze of Deception series, that there are elements of our government who have been exposed and know that there are these kinds of technologies and intelligences. And I would like to turn at that point around to you guys and say, is there any reason that you can think of about why really the human family in all of its complex 7.2 billion should not know everything that each of the government entities knows and is keeping from us?
Absolutely not. We have a right to know who gives someone the authority to sit in an elite group and say, well, the rest of the world doesn't deserve to know this. Only people who have greed and are trying to put price tags on energy or technology that we may have ability to get to, or even unlocking abilities we have. So you're absolutely right, Linda. Nobody has that authority to tell 7 billion people what is really happening, or to prevent us from knowing. And that's the part that disgusts me the most. And that is the reason I decided to be proactive about this.
And to make all of this even more complex, and I hope a lot of you who are listening will get inside of Maze of Deception without fear, and just know that I am trying to raise my own fan of very complex facets over 3 decades to this question that is on so many people's minds. What are we dealing with? What is the real intent? And among those questions about the intent, people keep raising, could Gabriel's horn be back because something is coming back to this planet that was here 5,000 years ago? And what they mean is the trumpets that have been recorded and heard around the world. Well, when I go into a subject, my first feeling is I want to try to understand the science, if I can, of what might be the first possibility. And in these sounds that have been being heard around the world, which has included trumpets that have been recorded since 2011, so many people have raised the question about whether or not this could be UFO technology. And what I'm going to drive at right now is this. I think it's equally possible that because of these core changes in our Earth that have not happened like this during humanity's standing up primate existence on the surface of the Earth, that there could be sounds that change from infrasound down in the core, coming through the mantle, out through the crust, up to the ionosphere, and bounce back, and then the infrasound changes from not being heard by the human ear into booms, trumpet sounds, agonizing sounds, metallic scraping sounds. It is such an interesting question, and I took that question straightforwardly to some people that have both worked in universities and one, a man who works in a big corporation in the Southeast. Oil and gas is his world. He's asked not to be identified, but I did a fascinating Earthfiles interview with him in March. And he has been studying this whole issue because guys that are in the gas and oil and fracking business, they want to know geophysically what they're dealing with on the surface of the Earth and going down toward the mantle. And the surface that we live on is just like a thin rind. It ranges from 5 to 30 miles sitting on this huge core, or we'll call it the mantle, going down to the core. The Earth is 8,000 miles in diameter. So when you get 4,000 miles below your feet right now, you're at the center of that hard iron crystal core that's spinning in the liquid core. Well, all of this combination of those cores creating magnetic fields, there is also something called the human resonance, and it is a resonance between layers of the upper atmosphere. It's where NASA has recorded sprites, the bright flashes of light that are seen from the space station. There can be electrical strikes at high altitude, and the human resonance is about 7.5 hertz. It's called the low-frequency vibration that resonates with whatever is being generated by our solid and liquid inner core of the Earth. Well, if you have changes in those cores and it goes out, and we've already got a human resonance frequency there, they know that the infrasound can translate itself through the molecules coming to the mantle to the crust, and that there is some hypothesis that the core could go up in frequencies to the ionosphere and bounce back. So it is possible that these strange, eerie sounds are strictly related to cycles in this Earth at times when the poles are getting ready to change. That's just a hypothesis.
It's
And
interesting you say that, Linda, because that we've just heard from a report in Indonesia that they've just started to hear this trumpet sounds there, and someone's recorded it. If you type trumpets and Indonesia, Sumatra, you'll get that new one. Have you heard that yourself?
I have heard the Indonesian one recently, and I have a whole collection. All of my Earthfiles reports about the sounds going back to 2011. I have the scrapings, I have the trumpet sounds, I have the booms, some with flashes of light, and I'm glad that you brought it up because the Indonesian issue is new, and people say, but why would there be anything sounding like music if it had to do with the inner core? Well, this to me underscores that not everything is in the category of unidentified aerial phenomena. Our own Earth, below our feet, is as mysterious a place as any of the planets in the dwarf moon Ceres that we are now trying to explore through machines going out into the solar system. We know so very little, but the very fact that we are now in the 21st century, when there seems to be a confluence, like a lot of tributaries running into a river, of internal core changes, all kinds of climate changes, the magnetic field is dropping. And here is a statistic for you. It turns out that clay pottery going back 5,000 years, when clay is fired in an oven, whatever the iron particles in the clay had preserved about the Earth's magnetic field orientation are erased during the firing. And then in the cooling, they will take on whatever the current magnetic field is. And so there are scientists who have studied pottery going back to Mesopotamia and up through to the modern age and in Peru and so forth. And they have found that in the last last 200 years. There's a percentage in 300 years and the last 200 years. The magnetic field of the Earth in the last 200 years has declined 15%, and that most recently, those swarm satellites, it was the most rapid decline that they have seen over the Western Hemisphere. And so that there's been a general picture, because of what they've been able to study in the pottery, of this decline in the magnetic fields. Well, this could be a whole combination of all kinds of factors coming into play in the 21st century, in which there are cycles in this Earth that it would go through. Whether there was the consciousness of humanity ever here, the Earth would be going through these cycles. That's one layer of phenomena. On top of that, there may be something very specific to the non-human intelligences that have been interacting with this planet, as far as I have been told, for at least 270 million years, long before the dinosaurs. And that whatever their interests are in coming and going and interacting with this planet, other planets, wherever they have terraforming projects, it might be that there are times like this when planets go through cycles of pole changes, and maybe the sun is going through its own strange cycle. Maybe the sun is going to go into something like a Maunder minimum, and it won't have sunspots, and things will cool a little tiny bit from a little 0.5% reduction in the sun's ability to radiate light and heat. That's been hypothesized. All of this happening at the same time in the same century, and that we have birds disappearing, mass die-offs, huge mass strandings of marine animals over and over and over again. It could all be part of the same picture. Am I afraid of any of this? I am not. I don't think anybody should be. I am excited and fascinated to learn about what is happening with our Earth naturally, and I am especially looking forward to that headline, "We're not alone in this universe," and that maybe the rest of the 21st century, while the climate is changing, the poles might flip at the end, I think humanity will be here. They may have to go underground at some point, but we are here. We are consciousness in this universe, and something is interacting with us because we have consciousness. And you put all that together, and that is the essence of what I am trying to lay out in the maze of deceit.
And again, everybody out there can see it at earthfiles.com. Literally, you'll see a link, Maze of Deception, Part 1, Part 2, currently at Part 15. Linda, we have about 25 minutes left. I don't want to, you can go on any topic you want. If you want to change the topic to Ceres, the dwarf planet, we absolutely can. Or if you want to continue on the magnetism, I got an amazing question. It's totally
Well, I love astronomy. Astronomy was my favorite subject when I was a little kid. My dad said I started asking for a telescope when I was age 4, and he got me a little Dynoscope reflector. And I spent most of my childhood, when the weather was okay, out in the backyard with my telescope. I loved the night sky. I loved studying it. I loved learning about it. And now we are through the digital age, and NASA and ESA and spacecraft that are going out into the solar system to be seeing close up things that were not even, Hubble had not gotten a good picture of Ceres, the dwarf planet between Mars and Jupiter. Hubble itself, casting its eye out toward about 180 million miles from here to that dwarf planet, that long ago, the mystery was, why in that asteroid belt area, why was there a reason? What happened that one object and one object only in that big space between Mars and Jupiter would end up completely spherical and round, which is the astronomical definition of a planet? And It's called a dwarf planet because it's only 598 miles in diameter, about 600 miles. And it started with the Hubble is now in 2004 was trying to get a photograph of this mysterious little round object there, and it was kind of blurry. The pixelation was not very refined. But in the 2004 photographs, which I have in all the reports that I have done about Ceres at Earthfiles, and I'm doing Earthfiles News video segments now on YouTube, and I've done 2 of them on Ceres, and you can see these 2004 Hubble photographs. There is the same bright spot 10 years ago. So when in the first week of March that we got the first photographs at quite a distance from the Ceres, but it was from the Dawn spacecraft, and here was something bright showing on the dwarf planet, even those very first photos. And then in the first week of June 2015, they took the Dawn spacecraft and they operated some of the hydrazine jets, and they took it down into an orbit that was 2,700 miles above this dwarf planet Ceres. And that's when the fuzzy, bright spot from 10 years before, and then the first week of March, finally, in the first week of June, it wasn't so furry. It wasn't so fuzzy. It looked like bright spots, and at the 2,700 miles above the surface, you could see and count that there were at least 8 spots, and that there were 2 patterns of those 8 spots that look like equilateral triangles. So you've got a bright spot and a second bright spot, and then on either side of the second bright spot is a triangular pattern of bright spots, and down opposite of that triangle is another, what appears to be like a triangle of bright spots, making up about 8, depending on how you count it. Well, the very fact that 10 years ago Hubble photographed and saw that bright spot, and now we're there getting up close, it raised the question, what in the world could sustain, no matter what the answer is to these bright spots, why would they be 40 times brighter than the background darkness? Ceres is a very dark dwarf planet. But these are 40 times brighter, these spots, and they have been in the same place for 10 years. Does that seem like that would be ice or salt? That's what NASA keeps putting out as a possibility. But even in my interview with the principal investigator at UCLA, Christopher Russell, he's the professor of geophysics and space science, and he's the principal investigator. And when I said and asked him, what about the possibility of other intelligence, he does not dismiss it. He has had, of course, they've had thousands of people emailing and texting about their ideas about what these bright spots, and lots of people are saying, well, maybe it's a beacon for ETs and all of that. So they've been hearing those kinds of questions. But he said at this point, he calls this one of the most unique planetary surfaces of like a phenomena. This is truly, and here's a quote, it's not like anything that I've seen before on a planetary surface, and he has been working in astronomy for over 30 years. So he's putting this in the category of something that is highly extraordinary. And we are now at the beginning of July. The orbit of the Dawn has still been at 2,700 miles, but it is going to start now spiraling down to the next third orbit that will be closer yet, and the end of August, by the 1st of September, we should have images, but by the end of August, it should be settling into another orbit at 932 miles above the surface. And by then, if there's structure, if there's something, hopefully we will be able to see at 932. And if that doesn't show it, by December, it will be the lowest it will ever be, 235 miles above the surface taking images. And 235 miles is lower than it would be below the ISS here on Earth, the International Space Station. Now, I thought and said to him in great enthusiasm in the interview that I did, well, then, sir, that means that we should be able to see in great detail the bright spots in that crater. And the bright spots cover about 6 miles inside of a 55-mile diameter crater. So whatever it is, it's covering quite a lot of space. And he surprised me when he said, no, we won't be able to get a resolution that is smaller than 40 miles by, or 40, it's going to be 40 meters across. One pixel will have a dimension of about 150 feet by 150 feet. And he said so that they won't be able to see tiny details. Well, when I asked why, he said, because we have a very inexpensive camera. And I said, how could that be possible that you would have an inexpensive camera on Dawn going out to this dwarf planet for the first time in human history? And he said, because a large camera would have cost us a lot more money, and we bought the best space camera that we could get that was affordable, and we made a compromise. So we have a balance between the data we can take and the data that we can transmit, and nothing will be, they'll not be able to get down and see anything that is smaller than about 150 feet across. I was surprised by that. And one other thing, if this crater, 55 miles across with 6 miles of these bright, bright, bright spots, 40 times brighter than the rest of Ceres, has been there for at least 10 years since Hubble's first photographs in 2004. You would think, just your intuition, gut would say, well, whatever it is, maybe there's something that is radiating, maybe it is a mineral, maybe it would be warmer than the surface. Well, when they did infrared, the surface temperature of Ceres averages about minus 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and they got photographs of one area in Ceres that was definitely colder than 160 degrees, but when they concentrated specifically on what they call Area 5, which is the crater that has the bright spots in it, it was in infrared, it was exactly the same color as the surroundings, which means there was no variation in temperature. And that is actually another big mystery.
Linda, I know that like NASA recently have been talking about the probe that's just about to sort of pass around Pluto. Do you have any information regarding that, or what you might expect to see yourself?
Well, I saw the headlines that have been floating around about Wickramasinghe in the UK, announcing that its Philae, the probe on the comet where we took the photos, that there was black carbon, and that meant there was life. Well, the European Space Agency hasn't officially made any announcement. No scientist working on the Philae mission has made any such statement. So I think that this is an example of people being enthusiastic about looking at images and drawing conclusions that somehow get turned into a headline. And we're also, a big problem today, I think, in the digital age is that they're spreading like weeds. And these are the websites that will put up any hysterical headline in order to get click-throughs for dollars. And so it's becoming really tough to vet 24-hour news cycles, what's real and what isn't. And if you're referencing that headline that has been coming from, I think it's the UK first, about there being carbon life on that comet, I'm waiting to hear from what the European Space Agency says officially. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't think yet we have data that has been published. And if that is it, then, gentlemen, that headline, there's other life in the solar system, it would already have been discovered on Soleil. But I don't know that that's going to occur. That's the latest thing that I have tried to track down and have found there's no official word yet. Do you have any other information yourself?
I don't. I wish I did, but we have under 15 minutes left. I want to continue to talk about Ceres, and if you tell me if you want to change to Snowden, I think the fact that there's actually more bright lights than ever, 40 times brighter than other things, is fantastic, because I'm sure you heard about what SETI's now doing. Instead of looking for radio waves, they're going to start looking for lights, artificial lights. So, I mean, just brilliant. Finally, it took them decades to catch up to what we've been saying. And the other thing, is this related at all to the sunless/starless planet, which is basically a planet that is just floating by itself through space that NASA found several months back?
Well, as far as I know, there is no Nibiru, and I'm sure there are people who are yelling at me on the other side of the radio, but here's what I understand from a whole bunch of astronomy reports. It goes back at least 10 years ago. Dan Brown, he is an astronomer. He's probably found more things in the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud that surround our solar system than just about anybody. He's the one who discovered Sedna, the very strange large body that is red-colored out in the edge between the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud. It was Dan Brown and another astronomer down, I believe, in Louisiana. Not that they were working together, but they both came to the same kind of hypothesis about perturbations. In fact, my Earthfiles story was called Perturbations in the Oort cloud, and it had to do with tracking comets coming from the Oort cloud out that can be almost, a quarter of a light year away, and that there were perturbations in some cometary paths that suggested that there was a large mass that was affecting them. And over the last decade, I don't know if this is called solid evidence fact yet, but the hypothesis was that this solar system may have started out with the birth as a binary sun system. And binary sun systems are quite common in this arm of the Milky Way, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. That is a binary star system. There's quite a few of them. And that out a quarter to a half light year, this other object that has mass but has no light could only be picked up in, as I understand it, I think it was in infrared, that there was something there, and that was the hypothesis, that there was a brown dwarf that we have never photographed, but that it would explain perturbations in some of the cometary paths. That is the only hard science that I know that has come down on the side of a large mass that's out in the Kuiper Belt to the Oort cloud. That is far distant from Pluto, from Neptune, Uranus, from Jupiter and Saturn, for all of our planets here. It's not something that is passing through our solar system. If a large planetary body the size of our Earth were approaching our solar system, astronomers would pick up around the world that there were planetary perturbations, that there would be perturbations. I do not think that an Earth-sized mass could sneak up on the solar system. And even if that is a hypothetical question with a hypothetical answer, the idea of on the Nibiru question, as far as I know, there's nothing real there in astronomy. But we may have been a solar system that was supposed to be a binary and that the brown dwarf is out there. And Ceres is, to me, not just the bright spots in the crater, whatever they are. It is the fact that this round mass, it has water vapor, was measured coming off of it last year. That shocked everybody. When I discussed Ceres with scientists from my Earthfiles reports, they said there may even be a layer of liquid water under the surface of Ceres. And then you get to the 3-mile-high sort of pyramid-shaped mountain that was photographed just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's a 598-mile diameter sphere. And it has a 3-mile-high sort of pyramid-shaped mountain. It is the only high-altitude object on Ceres. Well, what in the world would be the geophysical forces on this little dwarf planet that could cause a 3-mile-high mountain? If a meteorite came and slammed into Ceres, you would think that you would see a big crater under or around the base of that big 3-mile-high mountain, but it's sitting on perfect surface, as if it was thrust up somehow. So in this dwarf planet that everybody thought was a strange spherical rock between Mars and Jupiter, we now have water vapor coming off of it, the possibility of liquid water in some level below the surface, the 3-mile-high single mountain on this spherical little dwarf planet, the 55-mile crater that has 6 miles of 40 times reflection coming off of unknown whatever it is on this planet, and that there are canyons, there are so many more craters than they expected to find, and this is one object that we are getting 235 miles above in our solar system. And the idea that Ceres, with all of its mysteries, is in a way a kind of metaphor, you guys, do you think, that we on Earth, not only do we not know what's in our solar system, we don't know what is out in the Oort cloud, and we don't even understand what is 4,000 miles below our feet in the center of Earth.
I think that's the most astonishing thing. And there's so many anomalies with this dwarf planet. I've actually heard on History Channel, that show Universe, a couple years ago, where they did an episode that we could have been living in a binary solar system. So I think it's just super fantastic. Linda, I just got to warn you, we have a little over 5 minutes left. We can continue to talk about this dwarf planet, or we could talk about the Snowden, or whatever you want, because there's so much importance about this dwarf planet, and all these anomalies that you mentioned, the crater with the lights, the giant mountain, all of these are just something that you're not going to find on any planet or most planets. And I think you have to take into account that some of these could be artificial.
Yes, and that non-human intelligence has been interacting with this entire solar system, not just the Earth, and that if we find on Mars and Enceladus and other places evidence that something else has terraformed throughout our solar system, I would never be surprised. My bias is that we're in a complex, dynamic universe, and that there are varying ranges of intelligence, just as Michio Kaku has outlined. And those that can harvest energy from suns can certainly move point to point and pop in and out of dimensions because they have learned how to manipulate frequencies, and that we are on a planet where we are the youngest life form. We're not the first, we're the youngest, and that we are discovering, I hope, with humility, that will take us away from violence and self-destruction, that we have so much ahead of us to learn and to be excited about if we would stop wars on this planet, which may be something that the non-humans watch from a kind of objective point of view, maybe even with disgust. But in this short period of time left, coming back from space and the excitement of it all to the depressing news that was reported by The Intercept, that they are the group that got Edward Snowden into the Soviet Union, where he has been, and he was the one who had worked in the NSA subcontracting and we'll say, is the whistleblower of all time.
Yes, definitely.
It was on July 1, again, a week ago, that The Intercept ran with a headline, NSA's X-Keyscore spy system on the world's private internet communications, and that they are reporting at The Intercept 48 top-secret documents from Edward Snowden's, we'll call it whistleblowing exercise here. And they said at The Intercept, these facts bolster one of Snowden's most controversial statements made in his very first video interview published by The Guardian on June 9th, 2013, 2 years ago. And this is what Snowden said. I, sitting at my desk, and that was at the NSA office in Hawaii, I, sitting at my desk, could wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the President of the United States if I had a personal email. And they go on to explain that the X-Keyscore, that this material that Snowden has leaked through The Intercept, these were training documents that repeatedly highlighted how you could, just with a few clicks, any analyst working for the NSA who had a private email, he would have access and could conduct all kinds of searches by simply entering a person's email address with this particular X-Keyscore software that they were able to use, and that they would be able to do sweeping searches, is the way The Intercept put it, on everything through email addresses, telephone numbers, the names, other identifying data, and said there is no indication in the documents reviewed that any prior approval, no prior approval was needed by anyone to do these searches. And that, you guys, you get the implication. That meant all of us, everyone with a computer using email, was easily, could anywhere in the United States be easily tracked, monitored by the NSA. And if you hear noise, it's because we've got a huge thunderstorm here.
That's what I
and
figured.
It's really pounding. I'm going to try to go around a corner.
It's okay.
To a different roof. Can you hear that?
We can. We literally have a little over 30 seconds left. I just want to say it is extremely sad what Snowden
It's unreal. Can you hear me?
found. Yeah,
Oh
the
my
storm
God,
is
this
crazy.
Is a storm.
What Snowden uncovered is disgusting. What's happening? We are in pure violation with unwarranted, or with searches and seizures without warrants. We are really living in Big Brother. Linda, it has honestly been a pleasure. I cannot wait to have you back. I want to turn it to you to give a final message to everybody. And everybody out there, don't forget, earthfiles.com. Watch Maze of Deception. It will blow you away. Last words, Linda?
Thank you so much, Dr. J, you guys in the UK, May we do it again. And I'm going to get off the phone because, man, it's thunder and lightning.
Okay. Thank you again so
All right.
much, everybody out
Yes,
there.
to you and the audience everywhere.
That's right. And everybody out there listening, we are doing this for you. Thank you, listeners. Of course, thank Linda and the team, Johnny, Danny, Lou, Tom, and of course, station owner Keith. And let's not forget Art Bell, who'll be joining us in a couple weeks. This is Dr. J, Dr. J Radio Live, signing out.